I lived in a pretty quiet area in Utah when I was in high school. The drive to school was about 35 minutes away, since my family lived outside of the main city in a rural area. I was never a fan of school as a teen, but I only had to tough it out a few more months since I was finishing up the second semester of my senior year. I was a pretty bad student, and I'd often skip class with my friends. We would always meet up at this McDonald's a few minutes away, then usually drive back to one of our houses together to hang out while our parents were at work. However, I had been placed on academic probation in January, so I couldn't afford to miss any more days unless I had a signed doctor's note. It was early on a Thursday afternoon when I was finishing up my food and lunch when a fight broke out in the cafeteria. One of the upperclassmen pranked one of the quieter, more shy freshmen at lunch and pulled out his chair as he was sitting down to eat. I watched as he fell and hit his head on the table behind him, knocking him out. Right after this happened, a few people approached the kid who pulled the chair out and started fighting him. A huge commotion broke out as I watched a crowd full of people, including teachers and students, trying to break up the fight. After it settled down, I watched as the freshman stood up and assumingly was taken to the nurse's office to get checked out while the kid who pulled the chair out was probably taken to the principal's office. I was glad the bully was being punished for this, but I had my doubts if he really would be or not. He was one of the teacher's sons, so everyone always thought he got special treatment. Not really knowing what happened after that, I continued on with my day and went to class, which was conveniently located right by the main lobby entrance where I would park my car. During my last period in sociology, I heard a startling announcement over the PA system in the school. Our principal informed all teachers and students that the school was being placed in lockdown. Most people assumed it was a drill, but I noticed the panic in his voice, which made me worried that it wasn't. We followed lockdown procedure and waited inside the classroom. The secretary's office was directly to the left of the classroom, and we could hear a woman screaming in the hallway right outside the office. She sounded manic, as she made threats to the principal and staff that she would kill them. I was definitely confused as to why some crazy woman would be doing this, and I felt worried that something bad was about to happen. A few minutes went by and the screaming thankfully stopped. The principal announced to the school that we were being taken out of lockdown and we could resume class. I was relieved, since we only had 10 minutes left until school ended. Within minutes after that announcement, I heard the manic screaming start up again, but this time it was coming from a man. Then the announcement was made to the school once again that we were being placed into lockdown. Everyone was so confused as to what was going on. Only this time, the lockdown lasted longer. We all waited in the classroom in complete silence, trying to listen to what was going on outside the room. The man was screaming manically, which sounded very similar to the woman who was doing the same thing prior. Finally, after another hour or so, the principal announced that we were not in lockdown and free to go home. As I walked out, I noticed several cops standing around in the lobby area, speaking with some of the staff. With none of the students knowing what happened, we all went home, extremely confused. The next day, one of the students found the police report online and the word spread around the school pretty quickly. It turns out, the screaming coming from the hallway was from the parents of the freshman boy who'd been knocked out during lunch from hitting his head after being pranked by the older student. Apparently, the mom showed up to the school furious because the student was not suspended and her son sustained wounds and a concussion to the head, while the student who pulled out the chair only got detention, probably because he was one of the teacher's sons. Once the mother found that out, she became enraged and came into the school screaming at the staff. She eventually left, which is when the lockdown was lifted. Once she was removed from the property, she told the father, who then stormed into the school with a gun threatening to kill the student and teachers who were only giving him a detention for the prank. He ended up assaulting the principal and beating him up pretty badly, but no one was killed or had any lasting injuries. The parents who caused the huge scene were known as really nice people, but they were enraged hearing that their son was being bullied and there were no significant repercussions for the bully. The situation could have been a lot worse, but I'm glad that nobody was killed in the end. My high school is rather small compared to most, but it's fairly new and pretty nice. It's a private school that has been known as the best school in the area, so a lot of families decide to pay the extra money for the better education. It was late May, so we were mostly wrapping up the school year and preparing for the upcoming finals. The day started off just like every other day. I woke up, grabbed something to eat for breakfast, and got in my car to leave for the day. It was raining super hard, and I remember getting soaked making the 10-yard trip to my car in the driveway from the house. With the windshield wipers on full speed, I carefully drove on the flooding roads as I ventured on my way to school. A couple hours passed, and I was in my third period chemistry class when the heavy rainstorm began to turn into a full-blown thunderstorm. My classmates and I started getting high wind advisories and flash flood warnings on our phones. The wind could be heard really loudly, making that eerie howling sound from the strong gusts. Third period ended as the bell rang, and we all stood up to move on to fourth period. My school is 2 stories tall, with a basement, making it 3 levels total. My fourth period class was history, which was upstairs on the top floor. As I was making my way up the staircase, I thought I heard a strange noise. I couldn't tell if it was the howling wind or some sort of siren, so I stood looking out the window for a few seconds at the crazy storm. Right when I thought the sound went away, I heard it again, but this time much louder, and I recognized the noise. It was the tornado siren, coming from the City Hall complex a mile or so away from the school. I felt myself start to panic, and within a minute, I heard our principal make an announcement over the PA system that we were being placed into a tornado lockdown, and that everyone needed to follow the tornado lockdown procedures, since we were all trained by our teachers in our specific classes for protocol of what to do in these situations in each classroom. But the entire school was in the middle of switching classes. People were running and pushing into each other, screaming, heading for the basement. Chaos sparked. There were designated spots to go for tornado lockdowns on the first floor, such as the bathrooms, but I didn't want to take a chance, so I headed for the basement with everyone else. Upon entering the basement, I could see it was total chaos. People were literally getting run over and trampled on the floor, and several students were on their knees up against the wall, covering their head like we're taught to do in these situations. I knew it was way too crowded and dangerous, so I sprinted up the stairs and headed for the bathroom on the west side of the school. There were no students in there with me, but at least 6 or 7 teachers. The glass block window in the bathroom had a small opening for ventilation, and I looked out of it. There was little to no visibility as I peered through the tiny window. After maybe 5 seconds of looking out, I began to hear a low, roaring, rumbling sound that was increasing in volume, so I shut the window and ran into a stall that was accompanied by another teacher, dropped down on my knees, and held onto the pipes behind the toilet while trying to cover my head at the same time. The noise grew louder and closer, so I braced as hard as I possibly could for what was about to happen. Within seconds, I felt the building shaking and heard violent crashing sounds as the lights to the building went dark, terrified of what was happening. After 20 seconds or so, the noise stopped and I could hear it getting quieter. Everyone in the room began to stand up and peek out into the hallway. I couldn't believe my eyes. The entire east end of the building was covered in dust and debris, and I could hear people talking and coughing on the other side of the hallway. I felt like I was just in some sort of movie or a crazy dream. I was picked up later that day by my parents. It turns out, an F3 tornado hit the east side of the school and almost completely ripped apart the top floor on that side. By some miracle, nobody on the east wing was severely hurt or killed. I think much of it is due to the fact that the tornado hit during the time when everyone was switching classes. If it occurred during the middle of a period, the tornado lockdown procedure would have been very organized, and there would have been a lot more people on the east wing. Instead, the majority of everyone was in the basement. Unfortunately, my car, along with the other cars parked in the east lot, were totaled, but I was much more thankful that I was okay instead of the car. I'm thankful that everyone survived and is okay. The situation easily could have ended much worse, with a very different conclusion. It was Halloween day at my school, and we were all allowed to dress up in costumes for the holiday. I remember I was in math class, and it was nearing lunchtime when our school dean made a horrifying announcement over the PA system. He said, "Attention, all teachers and students. We are going into lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, we are going into lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, please lock all doors and windows and wait for further instruction." I felt shivers going down my spine as I heard this. I felt the tension and fear radiating through my classmates, and especially my teacher, who I'll refer to as Mr. Smith for context. Mr. Smith instantly stood up and locked the 2 doors to the classroom and shut off the lights. He asked the students seated by the windows to close and lock them. He then ordered us to the back corner of the classroom, away from the windows and furthest from the doors. We all sat huddled around each other, terrified, not knowing what would happen next. After 30 minutes or so, we could hear shouting in the hallways, which sounded like police searching the building. A couple more minutes went by until we heard a knock at the door. It sounded like a man, and he was claiming to be a policeman, asking to be let into the room. Our teacher, Mr. Smith, replied asking for verification that it was a cop. and the person on the other side of the door became very agitated and angry, screaming to be let in. This was an obvious red flag, and he refused to open the door. Then the banging sound started. The person outside the classroom was swinging at the door with some sort of object. The noises grew increasingly louder and stronger with each swing, and we rushed to grab whatever we could from the classroom to barricade the door and defend ourselves. By this time, the door was just about ready to fall off the hinges, and we were prepared for the worst. Just as we thought he was going to break in, we heard the police yell at him, telling him to stop and put his hands up. A few moments went by when we heard the police outside radio in that the suspect was detained. A sense of relief filled the room as we heard that the person was being cuffed and taken away from the school. One of the policemen shouted to us, asking if everyone was alright, and the class collectively responded saying yes at the same time. Although we believed the problem was taken care of, they told us to remain in lockdown until we heard an announcement over the PA, so the police could thoroughly search the entire building to make sure it was safe. After another hour or so, we were relieved to finally hear the dean come over the PA system and announce that we were no longer in lockdown, and any student wishing to leave for the day may do so. Not too long after this incident, word spread around the school that the deranged attacker was a student who planned to attack Mr. Smith because he had failed several tests in the class and was going to be failed for the semester. He was armed with a wooden bat and a pocket knife. I'm glad that the situation was de-escalated before the student broke down the door. I'm also very grateful that Mr. Smith sensed the fraud from the student when he claimed that he was a policeman wanting to be let in. This day really made me see life differently, realizing how it can be changed in an instant. I'm just glad nobody was ever hurt.